Alright, so this is the first part of lesson 5.1, where we'll be writing equations in slope-intercept form. So if you remember, in this unit we're talking about linear equations, and remember those are equations that when graphed form a straight line, like you see here in these two images. And what we're trying to do in this lesson is start to learn how do we write these equations and how do we understand what they're saying, what they mean, what are the different parts, and how does it all go together. And so that's what we're going to do is kind of break these equations down a little bit into its parts and understand what makes this a linear equation and what does everything mean. And we'll specifically be looking at one form of a linear equation. And this first form of a linear equation that we're looking at is called the slope-intercept form. And that name, slope-intercept, is telling you the main parts of this way of writing the linear equation. Now, as I said, there's multiple ways of writing the equation. And so what we're looking at is one of the most general ways, one of the most regular ways that we write it and work with it. And so we want to kind of break that down and make sure we understand what's going on there. So you see here, again, it's called slope-intercept because the two main parts are the slope and the intercept, or what we call the y-intercept. And so y equals mx plus b is the slope-intercept form. What that is a general way of writing a linear equation. Okay? Every linear equation can be written in that way. And so we have the different parts here. We have the y and the x. Okay, the y and the x, those are your terms that we use for the points, or the coordinate points that make up this linear equation. All right, so those numbers can be a lot of different numbers for this equation. Right? We plug in a number for x and we can get out our y. But the two main parts that we want to pay attention to today are the m and the b here. And you see here it says the m is the slope. Okay, that's the letter that we use to represent for slope. And b is the y-intercept. That's the letter we use to represent the y-intercept. Now, both of those are fixed numbers for each individual equation. So one equation is going to have a number for an m and a number for a b, okay, the slope and the y-intercept. And if you remember, that slope is the value that shows how much this line is changing by from one point to the next. What's the change in the y and the change in the x? The rise over run, right? That's the slope. And so that number is telling us from one point to the next, how much do I go up and how much do I go over? Hey, what's the change of the graph? How steep is it? How flat is it? What's going on there? It kind of gives us an idea of the shape. Now they're all straight lines, so that's the shape, but it kind of gives us a little bit of its orientation or how steep and how flat it is. The b there is the y-intercept, okay? And we haven't talked about that as much, but if you think about that word, intercept, right? If you think about maybe an interception in football, right? That's where you get the football from the other team, you catch the pass, right? That's an intercept. And so the y-intercept is where the line is intercepting or crossing the y-axis. Right? So every linear equation, every straight line on a graph is going to touch the y-axis at some point, at one single point. And the y-intercept, the b in this equation, is that y-intercept. And so it's a single number that's telling us where is this line touching the y-axis. And so again, this is just a general way of writing a linear equation. And we're trying to understand how the slope and the y-intercept tell us a little bit something about that equation and how we can write that equation from the information that's given to us. We have y equals mx plus b. The y and the x are staying the same, and it's the m and the b that we're trying to figure out what goes in those spots. And so here we have a line on a graph, and we want to write the equation for this line. Remember, every graph has an equation that goes with it. And so to write the equation, we're going to find what's the slope and what's the y-intercept. Okay? And so our slope here from one point to the next is we rise 3 and we run 2. And so our slope is 3 over 2. And it's touching the y-axis at 1, or it's crossing the y-axis at 1 on the y-axis, so our intercept is 1. So our slope is, or our equation is y equals 3 over 2x, 3 halves x, plus 1. And that's the equation that goes with this line. All right? So this line and this equation are telling us the same thing, just in different forms. Okay? This is the equation, and this is the graph. And so that's what we're trying to figure out how to do, is how do we take a graph and make the equation in slope-intercept form. how do we write these equations? All right, so we're just looking at a few more examples real quick. This is on the first page of your notes. So if you look here, we're going to write the equation using the slope and the y-intercept. So they give us a slope and they give us a y-intercept, and we're going to write the equation. So all we're doing is plugging in the slope and the y-intercept to make sure we can get things in the right place. So if you remember, our slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, and so we're going to try to figure out what goes in our m and what goes in our b slots. And so there, our slope is 4 over 5, okay, that's what it says there, 4 over 5, and that's what goes for the m. And our slope, or y-intercept is 3, and that's what's going to go in the b slot. So I rewrite this as y equal to, instead of m, I'll write 4/5 x, plus, instead of b, it's 3. So I have this form here, and all I'm doing is taking out the m and putting in the slope that they gave me, and taking out the b and putting in the y-intercept that they gave me. And this is the equation, right? This is the linear equation. The y, the equals, the x, and the plus all stayed the same. I just replaced the slope and the y-intercept. And so that's your answer. Let's look at this other example here. Slope equals 1/2 and y-intercept is equal to -6. So again, I'm plugging in to y equals mx plus b. The y will stay the same, the equal will stay the same. For my m is 1/2, that's my slope, so 1/2 x plus, and then my b is -6, so that's -6 plus -6. I'm going to put that in parentheses to kind of separate it out from the plus and the minus. Now here's one other thing. When it says plus a -6 or plus a -6, I'm going to simplify that, and this is going to become a -6, right? Because adding a negative number is the same thing as subtracting. Okay, and so we're going to write this in the simplest form, right? You know, when we can use fewer symbols or write it in a simpler way, that's what we want to do. We want to try to make it as simple as possible. And so this is how you would write the final answer here. So I've got my slope of 1/2 and my y-intercept is -6, so I write -6. So that's the only time that that plus changes to a minus is when you're adding a negative number. So pay attention to that. Now let's look at one more example where we're using the graph to write the equation. All right, so we have this graph of this straight line right here, and we're given a couple points here, and we want to figure out what's the equation of that line in slope-intercept form. So if you remember, so we're not given the slope or the y-intercept. They're not just telling us the numbers. We have to figure that out. And so if you remember, our slope is rise over run. So how much does it go up or down, and how much does it go left or right? And so from this point to this point, how much does it go down and how much does it go over? So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it goes over 5. So it went down 4. So I'm going to write that as a -4 because it went down 4. And then it goes over to the right 5. So my slope is -4/5. -4 over 5. Hey, that's going to be the slope. Went down 4 and over 5. Now the y-intercept is where the line is crossing the y-axis. Remember, the up and down axis is the y-axis. So this is my y-axis right here. And so this point right here is where the line is crossing the y-axis. And so what is that point? Is 0, 1, 2, 3. So this point is at 0, 3. Point's at 0, 3. And so the y-intercept is 3. It's a positive 3, right? Because that's where the y value is. That's where it touches the y-axis at 3. And so the equation is going to be y equals to our slope, -4/5, x plus our y-intercept, 3. And that's it. And so that's all we're doing here in this first part of the lesson is taking either the values that are given to us or a graph and writing the linear equation from it. Okay? And so that's what we're going to be focused on. We're just filling in that slope-intercept form y equals mx plus b. M is our slope and b is our y-intercept.